I'm going to just turn it over right now to the Auditor General, Alberta's Auditor General, Merwan Saher.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I plan to make some introductory comments. It's about 1,000 words, and that takes me about 6 minutes. So I'm setting the scene for you. From my point of view, there are important things for me to say, so let me get started. With me today are three of the office's Assistant Auditors General, Brad Ireland, Eric Leonty, and Rob Driesen. My introduction to our February 2018 public report is on pages 1 to 3 of the report itself. I'll take a few minutes to tell you why that introduction is important to MLAs and Albertans. For me, it's important because we work for all members of the Legislative Assembly, and through them, all 4.3 million Albertans. Where necessary, MLAs and Albertans should urge improvement in oversight as the means to cost-effective use of public resources. I'm going to talk about the importance of oversight, and I'll relate oversight to our findings on the topics that are the subject of this February report. Actually, it's risky for me to talk about oversight in isolation of governance and accountability for results. These three processes must work together in the government of Alberta to provide value for money for Albertans. Governance. It's simply a process and structure that brings together capable people and relevant information to achieve results. And by that I mean the cost-effective use of public resources. Oversight is the job of being vigilant, checking that processes and systems, including the accountability for results system, are working well, and signaling and modeling preferred behavior. And one does all of that not just because it's a good thing to do. One does all of that all in pursuit of desired results. And accountability for results is setting and communicating measurable results and responsibilities, planning what needs to be done to achieve results, doing the work and monitoring progress, reporting on results, and most importantly, evaluating results and providing feedback. In other words, results analysis. Accountability for results is ultimately trying to understand what it is that one set out to do so that one can learn and adjust course if necessary. The whole purpose of the triplet is to learn from what you are doing so that you can do better in the future. Feed the analysis back into planning. Should we continue this program at its current cost because we're getting the results we want? Should we spend more because the evidence is that will give us more of what we want? Or should we abandon this program swiftly? It's clearly not working at all, or the costs to achieve the results are unreasonable. You won't get accountability for results without oversight. Invariably, the result of good oversight is improved organizational results. And without the right people and information, you are severely at risk of waste. But oversight is the glue that holds it all together. Without good oversight, achieving results is a game of chance. And oversight at multiple levels is a recurrent theme in this report. Our findings show both where oversight is working, but unfortunately we also found many cases where it needs to be improved. Improvement will result in better risk management and increased likelihood of identifying waste and missed opportunities. An excellent example of where oversight at different levels has worked to achieve results is Alberta's Climate Leadership Plan. The government established a Climate Leadership Policy Committee comprising 5 ministers to make recommendations to Cabinet on initiatives and programs. Before matters were brought to this committee, a cross-ministry committee of deputy ministers and a separate cross-ministry committee of assistant deputy ministers reviewed the proposals to ensure their alignment. This rigor undoubtedly contributed to the progress so far. We have recommended the government develop and use comprehensive implementation plans for the Climate Leadership Plan and for each of its programs. Such plans are essential when there are a large number of actions, multiple parties, and complex interrelationships. Such plans are the means by which those responsible for their execution can demonstrate accountability for their commitment to achieve desired results. It is therefore troubling that the Climate Leadership Policy Committee has now been disbanded. The potential of such an oversight committee in terms of ensuring objective monitoring of the benefits and costs and encouraging learning and corrective action from that information is the key to ongoing success. The findings reported in our annual Post-Secondary Institutions Report Card demonstrate where oversight has led to improvements at the majority of Alberta's public colleges and technical institutes. In the cases of Alberta College of Art and Design, Keano College, MacEwan University, and Northern Lakes College, our findings indicate that oversight needs to be improved. The report card should help those boards and management groups to focus their efforts, which we believe in turn will also better inform their decision-making. Legislative oversight by the Standing Committee on Alberta's Economic Future of the budget estimates of the Ministry of Education has not caused consideration of the class size initiative. The Department of Education has not been held to account for its spending of billions of dollars to reduce class sizes without publicly explaining why school jurisdictions have been unable to achieve the target for the K-3 grade group over the past 13 years. Regarding student attendance at Northland School Division, the Department of Education has taken a number of actions supporting the division broadly and focusing on attendance in schools generally. These actions are important, but the division still needs help with its attendance right now. The department must ensure it oversees the immediate implementation of an effective plan to improve attendance in the division. In our opinion, this oversight by the Public Service of Alberta is the key to not failing another generation of the division's children. The Alberta Petroleum Marketing Commission, that commission's management of the agreement to process bitumen at the Sturgeon refinery, is management of a complex, significant investment with long-term impact on the government and Albertans. By its very nature, it presents significant potential benefits and risks to Albertans. For an agency like the APMC to be successful and demonstrate stewardship when managing substantial commercial agreements, 3 elements are essential. The agency must have highly developed processes for managing risk, as well as the expertise and capacity to act on those processes. The agency should be subject to strong oversight processes to ensure risk management processes and staffing requirements are in place to support the success of the agreements. And the agency has an obligation to report on its operations to Albertans, whose resources it uses. We found improvements are needed in both risk management processes and in the need to report important information to Albertans. Oversight is also critical to Alberta Transportation's Commercial Vehicle Safety Program. It is the means to ensure Albertans that reasonable steps are being taken to identify high-risk carriers, deal with them appropriately, and ultimately help reduce risks while ensuring the goods transported on our highways make it to their destination. The Department of Transportation was still not, as of July the 1st, 2017, consistently following its policy of taking timely and appropriate enforcement action against non-compliant carriers. In the 8 years since we conducted an initial audit on this program, the department has made improvements to certain aspects of its systems. However, in this second follow-up audit, since the original audit in 2009, we again found insufficient improvement in the consistency of enforcement actions. Senior management in the department was not aware of this continued deficiency. In the case of the first of two Pure North grant processes we audited at Alberta Health, in 2013, oversight was voided through ministerial override of departmental grant processes. The department did follow its processes to award the 2016 grant to Pure North. In conclusion, and to summarize, oversight is at the very core of good government. It is the means by which those who serve, either through being elected or as members of the public service, can earn the public's confidence that they are managing public resources wisely. Thank you. That concludes my introductory comments. We'd be pleased to take your questions now. It would be helpful to us if you would identify yourself by name and the organization that you work for. Thank you.
Saher, my name is Charles Rusnell. I'm with CBC News here in Edmonton. Can you tell us, please, how it came to be that Pure North was given this $10 million grant in 2013, and what do you think about that process by which they came to get this money?
So we have set out in the report the processes that the department went through and that ultimately resulted in that grant of $10 million being made to Pure North. The processes generally are, a good process seeks to establish that value for money is a potential of making the grant. In other words, the grant will deliver results that would be useful, and in this particular case, useful to the management of healthcare in the province. The advice of the public service, the work that they went through, was to conclude that a case was not present that expending $10 million would in fact result in benefits to Albertans. The evidence was not there. That was the view of the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy then took a view that the missing evidence, if you will, to make the case was the research necessary to support the case that spending money in the ways that Pure North intended to use the grant would in fact result in better health outcomes. So the department ultimately proposed that a grant to fund research would make sense. This was the advice that flowed up through the chain into the minister's office. The minister used his prerogative to determine that the grant should proceed on the basis that it was articulated and requested by Pure North, even though he had evidence that the bureaucracy did not support that course of action.
How much value do Albertans get, if any, from this $10 million?
I can't tell you that. The point we make is that the process, which should have, part of a good process is to establish at the beginning the ways in which you will measure whether or not success from the grant has been achieved. And if the success is not absolute, what were the learnings, what can be taken and used in future thinking and improving healthcare. That just wasn't done.
This was $10 million. How is it that the Auditor General didn't know about this in 2014 or sooner?
Well, as you appreciate, we have a mandate to look in at a $50 billion enterprise. This is not a particular, we're interested in grant processes across departments. This is not a grant, we had no prior indication, if I would put it that way, that we should focus in on grant processes at the Department of Health. So it was.
How confident are you that this sort of thing will not happen again?
Our work is designed to improve the chances of good public administration. I think the fact that this, in the case of the 2013 grant, clearly our report will make it clear to Albertans that public administration, if you will, failed. Grant processes that are put in place to protect the public interest, to ensure that the risks of grant money being wasted, if you will, those processes are designed to minimize that risk. So I can't, no auditor can give any guarantees for the future, but I believe that the work that we have done will have made it clear to the public service generally that poor grant administration is something that can be identified, will be identified over time, and people should be held accountable for it.
Merwan, what's your concern about the schools initiative? I mean, the money actually go to the schools anyway, class size initiative.
Yes, so at the highest level, our concern about the class size initiative is actually, in a sense, embodied in the title. We've called this an audit of something called the class size initiative. It's an initiative that we understood, and our knowledge, if you will, traced the initiative back to 2013, when a case was made that the government of the day decided that it would spend money to reduce class sizes. Thus, it was an initiative. Since 2003, the so-called initiative has progressed year by year. We can trace into the department's estimates a line item originally described as class size initiative, latterly just class size. So clearly what we wanted to do was to see whether or not this expenditure of public money, whether the department had the processes and systems to understand whether this expenditure of public money was resulting and making a difference. What we discovered was that there has not been full reporting on the initiative in terms of this is what we wanted to achieve and this is what we have achieved. What we learned along the way is that the so-called class initiative, the sums of money described as class size initiative, essentially has morphed into just being part of the base funding to the education sector. So we have no evidence that this money, as it flows into jurisdictions, is not being used in the general good of educating children. But it would seem that it's not being, from the department's point of view, it is not being given with a clear instruction, if you will, that we expect back from you information that will help us assess whether or not this expenditure of money is in fact making a difference. So in our report we do cite some data in an appendix that the government has made public. It's data at a highly aggregated from point of view. It deals with averages by jurisdiction, of class size averages by jurisdiction. We make the point and a caution to Albertans using that information that averages can be misleading. If a jurisdiction at a particular level has certain classes that are deliberately and actually very small, that class size will mask, if you will, classes at the other end of the spectrum that are over the guideline. So averages are something that one needs to take with caution. At the highest level, and I mentioned this in my opening comments, the system really has an opportunity for when departments come forward with their estimates for the coming year. In this case, this initiative for the year ending 2017 was in the budget at something just less than $300 million, a line item. No questions were asked in 2 days of meetings as to whether or not the department, whether the minister was in fact achieving what was intended with that expenditure of money.
Can you tell us in what way the risks of the sturgeon refinery are not being, I guess, managed, and in what way they're not being publicly reported?
I'll start at the highest level, and in our report we have given an indication of the types of risks that do need to be managed. What we're saying is that for an endeavor of this size, there has to be any organization has to be able to demonstrate to an external auditor, in our case, that its risk management processes are well designed, that they are operating in practice, and that they are substantive and not, have the capacity to be used continuously. They're not just processes that are ad hoc, that there is a full risk management infrastructure there, an infrastructure that should be of concern to those who have oversight. So in this case, the board of APMC and ultimately the department and the minister. Our conclusion is that the APMC has not been able to evidence to us that it has well-designed systems. We can demonstrate that and have in the report by indicating some risks that have been identified by the agency. In fact, one risk has been made public to Albertans, but that risk doesn't appear in the registry. So on the face of it, it's not being actively managed. So what we're talking about is a well-designed, operating in practice risk management system. We have not been supplied or have not been able to find the evidence to prove that that is the case.
Do you feel that the residents of Alberta are being fully informed about the risks involved in this project?
My view is no. I believe the government could do a much better job and in fact should do a much better job of explaining to Albertans simply, and it's a matter of debate as to whether that explanation should be in a annual report from APMC itself or whether that should be in the ministry's annual report. My preference would be that it should be in a report from APMC itself. It exists as an organization with a board to oversee it. I believe that it's a sort of fundamental practice that entity should annually set out what it is seeking to do in that year and what it has achieved. But overall, this investment, the proposition is for every benefit, and undoubtedly there is the prospect of great benefit to Albertans, there are risks. The proposition, the risk-benefit proposition, should be set out simply, and Albertans should be informed of how the risks are in fact being managed. And simply, it's telling the story. Where we are today on this voyage, which is going to take another potentially 30 years, this is how we are today. I can assure Albertans that the economic consequences in terms of measuring whether or not the endeavor is projected to have losses over time, those computations are done and using assumptions, and the result of that is reflected in accounting, in the financial accounting. But that's not really the point. Albertans should understand, what is this endeavor? What are all of its benefits? And also, commensuratively, what are the risks? Maybe I'll just ask Eric to supplement here.
Sure. And maybe for some additional detail, within the Ministry of Energy annual report, we do note that the price differential risk is shown to Albertans, and that's the differential between diesel and other products, the revenues received and the bitumen. So that's a risk that APMC and the government's exposed to over time. However, there's a number of other risks. So, for instance, potential cost overruns, operational risks that potentially impact profitability to APMC. We highlight those as potentially other risks that should be shared with Albertans. Recognizing that in some cases there may be commercial sensitivities, things that maybe shouldn't be shared, but we didn't see an analysis of that either, as far as what can be shared with Albertans, what can't, and making sure that those are appropriately disclosed. So we certainly think we've made a recommendation, in fact, that APMC, working with the Department of Energy, should think about what they can report to give a clear picture to Albertans as far as the total benefits and risks.
They don't publish an annual report or make it public? They don't make it public, right? Did I see that somewhere in the report?
APMC does not have a public annual report. It's through the Ministry of Energy annual report that information about APMC's operations is included.
Did you get a sense of why they're not doing this, aside from just saying trust us? Why?
No, I can't explain to you why, other than I think that, I would make the case, and in terms of many of the audits we do, one of the findings we have is that the quality of the public performance reporting is poor. I take you back to class size initiative. I mean, that's a major finding. An expenditure of $300 million a year without good reporting on whether or not that is achieving its objectives. The office, as part of its strategic planning going out into the future, I mean, the office will be seeking to work with the government in trying to improve public reporting. If I can go back to APMC, in the absence of a clear, concise, simple to understand annual report of this particular endeavor, the Sturgeon refinery, and the government's agreement and commitments over a number of years, all that Albertans get are sort of ad hoc commentaries when some member of the public or an MLA chooses at a particular time to raise the Sturgeon refinery and make his or her comments in a particular way. So we, as citizens, we get subjected to almost a, point and counterpoint. The answer to all of that lies in good public reporting from the government.
You looked at some of the ministerial expenses. You singled out Indigenous relations. They don't seem to be, they're not getting the job done. What's going wrong?
Okay, well, this is why Brad's here today. Go for it, Brad.
Thanks. Yeah, so you're right. On page 122, we've highlighted them and we've made recommendations for them to improve their processes. So, just a few examples of things we found there. So, expenses that were incurred on procurement cards, those weren't being reviewed and approved on a timely basis. Documentation to support the business rationale of certain expenses didn't exist in some of the examples we looked at. Pre-approvals for out-of-province travel. The documentation to evidence that pre-approval was obtained was not in the files that we looked at. So in comparison to the other five departments we looked at, we felt that they had the most room for improvement.
Are these people within the minister's office then that you're looking at, or is this departmental, or how do you break that down?
So this was focused on the minister's expenses as well as the folks that work in the minister's office.
They're the ones not doing that. What do you mean pre-approval? So they're going out of the province and it's not clear why they're going or what the state of the mission is?
Well, the process in place is that the folks within the Premier's office have to approve all out-of-province travel by the ministers in advance. There's a certain form that needs to be completed. So when we looked at those out-of-province travels or a sample of them, we didn't find that pre-approval was in the files.
How much money are we talking about? I'm trying to remember what the total departmental or ministerial office budget is. Can you give us any numbers?
Not off the top of my head. It's not a huge amount of dollars.
These are not big dollars. We're doing this because this is important. It's important that there are, well-designed systems have been put in place to assure Albertans that their elected officials are, ministers are complying with good processes. And in fact, the government has responded to a recommendation that we made that oversight of all of that should be in the hands of Treasury Board, the Cabinet Committee. So we're very pleased that there is now an oversight group. But the oversight group is going to be, can't do its work properly if the information flowing up is not of the quality it should be. This is not rocket science. This is simple stuff. What we're demonstrating is most departments can get it right. So unashamedly, we're highlighting those that don't seem to be able to get it right. They should be highlighted, and the message should be, get it right. It's simple.
Why are they not? What did they tell you, that they're just too busy, or?
No, it's not a question that an auditor sort of naturally asks. You speculate, and the person on the other side you're talking to must be thinking the same in reverse. Why am I not getting this right? And you're thinking, well, why can't you get it right? But it's really a sort of, all I'm simply telling you is these are not complicated systems. And we as an office have decided in a rotational way to come back to this, because these are, what we're really trying to do is to protect ministers from not from themselves, but to protect them in a sense from doing something that damages the reputation, their reputations, in effect damages the reputation of a well-functioning system. I mean, that's why we spend time on it. But the point I'm trying to make is it's not large dollars, but that's not the point.
I get a sense you're upset about this because it's basically, after all this time, we're still talking about food receipts.
Yeah, it's this exercise that we do annually, and we'll continue to do it. I believe the office will continue to do it. It should be minimal cost to us to confirm that the system is working as it is. At the moment, we're spending far too much time in having to tell some departments you need to do this better, and in one case, you really need to try.
How disappointing is it as an auditor that you just have to keep doing this same thing?
Well, it is. No, it's not disappointing in that sense, because that's really our job, is to continue hammering away at things that aren't working well. As auditors, you try to say, am I hammering away at this because there's a fatal flaw? The policies that we're looking in at just are not implementable. In other words, that's why people are having difficulty complying. There's something wrong. It's an auditor's job to look in and try and diagnose why. But in this case, we can't diagnose any reason why anyone can't get this right.
Is that a bummer?
It is your word. It is because it's a waste of effort and time. That's the disappointing thing, is that the resources of this office should, through necessity, have to be applied to a matter of that nature. Or even that we're sitting here today discussing it, which is, we should. But the fact that we're discussing this in the presence of things like class size initiative, APMC's risk management, climate leadership plan, these are the things that citizens should focus on, in the assurance that these straightforward things are in fact just working well.
Are there any people on the teleconference participating? Are there any questions, operator?
Yes, your first question is from Rick Dolphin, Insight into Government. Rick, your line is open.
Merwan, good morning. I have a couple of questions. First, you cite the climate change system as being a kind of a model for the way things should work with the Cabinet Policy Committee and all the rest. Would a solution to the sort of overriding problem of lack of oversight be a committee like this, responsible for each department or some variation thereof, maybe even an auditor in each department?
Are you referring specifically to the climate leadership plan? Because many departments are involved in the execution of that plan. Or are you
disbanded committee as a sort of model, and say it was unfortunate that it got disbanded because it was a sort of, an example of the way things should be done. And I'm just wondering if that model or a variation thereof could be applied to all of the departments to ensure oversight.
And again, sorry, just for absolute clarity, generally speaking, not necessarily with respect to the climate change.
No.
Well, yes, generally speaking, the office believes that the oversight is critical. But oversight is there in every case. Every department has ministerial oversight. The oversight structures exist. Whether or not the oversight works well is that's something that we as an office look in at. If I come back to the post-secondary institutions where my colleagues have focused on the proposition that the quality of the underlying financial systems is in direct correlation with the quality of the oversight, I think we can see that that report card that we've produced over time has made a difference. Overseers don't like to see red marks, red crosses against something that they have oversight of. It has a sort of profound visceral effect on them, and that's good. But our point there is that that oversight has to continue. As to, I think the point I'm trying to make, Mr. Dolphin, is that oversight is actually in place. I think with the climate leadership plan, the oversight at the highest level of a committee of 5 ministers, overseeing on behalf of cabinet was essential to an endeavor that was being executed across government. Most departments are in some way involved and have work to do in this climate leadership plan. So it was absolutely critical that oversight be there. And it was cascading oversight. It started at the assistant deputy minister level. There were deputy ministers and then cabinet ministers themselves. And that's why we say we're concerned that that highest level of oversight has in fact been disbanded. But on the more generalized point of are there lessons there, I think the lesson is, and my purpose in citing the oversight of the climate leadership plan being correlated with good results, I think is a generalized message that can be applied to any government endeavor.
Right. Other questions, just sort of a general question. I'm presuming this is probably your last report before you retire. You've been with the department for 37 years. You've been the AG for the last 8 years, I believe. General observations on whether things have gotten better, worse, stayed the same? Are you just putting out different flyers, but are there the same number of flyers, kind of thing? I mean, what's your general impression of the effectiveness of the last 38 years?
So, Mr. Dolphin, you made an assumption there. And as an auditor, we're trained, don't make assumptions. Actually, I'm planning to release a final report before the completion of my term as AG. So this isn't my last report. All right. And I think that some of those questions that you have perhaps better suited to that final report.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you.
Any additional questions on the phone?
Your next question is from Chris Falco, Calgary Herald. Chris, your line is open.
Hi, Merwan. I have a couple of questions about the Northwest upgrader. I'm wondering if you can just talk about the fact that the capital costs have gone up repeatedly on this project, from $5.7 billion to $8.5 and then most recently to $9.4 billion. Can you talk about the impact this is going to have upon APMC's risks and whether you think that these risks have been properly managed and disclosed?
Eric, would you like to take that? Thank you.
Sure. So certainly, actually, it's one of the examples that we point to in the appendix as some of the risks related to this agreement. One is obviously the cost overruns, which has an impact on the debt toll that APMC will pay as part of the processing agreement. So certainly as that increases, that does increase the debt toll. So that is a risk. That being said, APMC doesn't have a lot of direct influence over the capital costs or the management of the construction. The construction is the responsibility of the partnership. APMC does have a 25% voting interest and attends a lot of committee meetings with the partners and the counterparties in the agreements. So it's through that mechanism that they exchange information and can manage risks. I think our concern as far as having a well-designed risk management system is that risk is clearly articulated. It's very clear what mitigating actions APMC could put in place. Sometimes it might be limited based on the amount of control they have over the risk, but having that clarity and that being well understood by both management, the board, the resources needed to manage that risk, and ultimately what sort of residual risk are they comfortable with. So because commercial operations haven't begun yet, that is still an ongoing risk that APMC needs to manage as far as how it impacts the profitability of the agreement.
Two follow-up questions, and that is, you say in the report that the risk exposure increased, and I'm presuming you mean here because of the capital costs going up, without any commensurate change in the benefits. And then later on you say that the NPV values of this project have fallen from somewhere between $200 and $700 million down to below $200 million. Should we as Albertans be concerned about those 2 points?
So I think that this is why the risk management and ongoing monitoring is very important. Certainly a 30-year agreement, what diesel prices do, what bitumen prices do have a direct impact on how profitable or otherwise the agreement may be. Another important variable is interest costs. So certainly interest rates had come down, and so that actually helped stabilize what the total tolls would be. So even though the capital costs were going up, interest rates were going down. So there's an offsetting impact. So we think that, through our work on reporting and the recommendation reporting, that some of those important variables and how they impact the profitability should be communicated. People may have different assumptions or forecasts of what prices and interest rates may do, and so that would have an impact on what the net present value is. Merwan did mention earlier that, through the annual financial reporting, APMC would be reporting on whether or not the net present value is above zero or not, and that would demonstrate the impacts of that. But certainly until some of the final numbers are in on the capital cost, that certainly does have an impact on, at a given point in time, what the profitability may be.
If I could...
Finally...
maybe I could just interrupt your final question. You're asking a question of an audit office that has done a report, should Albertans be concerned. I think the point that we're trying to make is it really shouldn't be the role of an audit office to have to say that these are matters that should be more fully and simply discussed in annual reports. So I would say concerned that these matters are not being simply talked about from the government's point of view in annual reporting. That should be the concern. I wouldn't jump straight to because the facts are the facts as you see them, that's concerning. I think Albertans should be saying to their government, please discuss these matters, please explain them to us in simple language that we can understand. Give us the confidence that you understand these risks and tell us how you're managing them.
Lastly, you mentioned in the report here that no audit on the capital costs have been done since 2012, even though we've seen at least 2 increases in those capital costs since then. Is that a point of concern?
Well, we've included it as a finding, so I think certainly it's fair to say it is a point of concern. I think one of the things that management has to do is to assess the risk and decide on the nature of the assurance activities. But if you can draw an analogy, in our financial statement audits that we do annually, even though we may assess in a given year that the risk of an error is low, we don't stop doing the financial statement audit. And I think that's the point we're trying to make here, is that ongoing vigilance, making sure that assurance work is done, sends a signal that the government is on top of making sure that those expenses all qualify as part of the capital cost. And if management is in fact saying that the risk they feel is low based on the information they have, that should be well documented and well evidenced to support that conclusion. And it may impact the amount of work that they do, but I think ongoing assurance work is important, and particularly since there's also a time frame in which the government can go back and actually look at those costs.
Any additional
Your
questions?
next question is from Jeffrey Morgan, Financial Post. Jeffrey, your line is open.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I realize in the report here you mentioned that the Energy East pipeline, the APMC hadn't, or you didn't consider the results there. Are you recommending that the government also publish risk-benefit analysis and consistent updates on some of the other contracts that the APMC has signed. For example, it just took a commitment on the Keystone XL pipeline over an extended period as well. And are you recommending that the government not sign further agreements until some of these reporting processes are put in place?
So we wouldn't be in a position to tell them whether or not they should be signing any future agreements. The recommendation that we've made with regards to reporting is that APMC has given appropriate consideration to the nature and extent of reporting. So, earlier in the question I'd mentioned that, they do have to consider commercial sensitivity. So, is the agreement at a certain point in time where it would be potentially, harmful to the government's interests to disclose something prematurely? So, what we would want to see, or at least I think what management will want to be able to demonstrate, is that they've given consideration to what is appropriate to report and what is not. So, as an agreement, is furthered and there's more information that can be shared, we'd expect good reporting would share what's appropriate.
And that good reporting should cover not only the Northwest Refinery, but these other projects that the government is committing to through the APMC?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, and finally, wanted to ask if there's any recommendations here that the government should have had or should have negotiated for a potentially an exit or a renegotiation clause when these capital costs started to grow in the Northwest Refinery case, because as Chris mentioned in his question, they did jump twice, and from 5.7 billion now to 9.4, 9.5. Are you concerned that the APMC did not give itself any ability to get out of these contracts?
So we make it clear in the report we didn't audit the negotiations themselves, but one important recommendation we do make is around lessons learned. And so we think that it's important for APMC and management to look back and to do that very analysis and to determine whether that would have an impact on any future negotiations and agreements. I mean, it's not uncommon for large-scale oil and gas projects to be higher than budget. But that being said, I think the lessons learned analysis is where we think is an area for improvement and something that could help with the premise of your question as far as learning from the past.
Operator, are there any other questions?
Your next question is from John Hempy, 770 CHQR. Your line is open.
Hi there. So in 2007, the school boards came back and said it was too much work on class sizes, and the department seemingly acquiesced. And it kind of looks like that's where things fell off the rails. Can you talk a little bit about the dangers of bowing to a request not to report back or have oversight, rather than being tough and putting their foot down and saying, no, you're going to show us where this money is going? And I've got a follow-up as well.
I'll just start and then I'll ask Rob Driesen. I have to make the point that as auditors, we don't run the business. So sort of embedded in your question is sort of, it's a reasonable question, but I want to sort of say it's difficult for us to have an objective view on whether or not at a point in time the department should have put its foot down and said, no, sorry, we don't buy the idea that it's too much work for you, or it's complicated, or it's getting in the way for you to give us the information that we require. I wouldn't be prepared to go that far because I don't have the evidence to make such a comment. I think the way that we would look at it is there was an initiative with a purpose, and if to understand whether or not you are achieving the purpose means that you have to get certain information, then that's what you have to do, because the ultimate goal is to report to Albertans on whether or not the investment of their money is achieving the desired result. So to me, it's not necessarily a case of the department being more or less vigorous in its demands. I would say that given the fact of an initiative, the there was really no choice but to insist that the information be provided or announce to the public that this initiative is now ended. Rob, can you?
Yeah, as we highlight on page 43 of our report, there's specific elements that you need with any program to assess whether it's working well and what you can do if you're not achieving desired results. And so the process of getting good information so you can make some analysis and decide what you might need to do to change your focus or your plan, and what maybe you need to do to adjust your expectation or your desired result is very important. So the other parts of the process fail if some of those earlier processes aren't in place, and that's what we've tried to highlight with our recommendation, that evaluation of the results is very important so that they can make an assessment of what to do with that program and how it might need to be adjusted, but also to report to Albertans what the results are and where they're going next.
And as a follow-up, the word "if" is used in the recommendation. If the department continues the initiative, would you suggest that if there is no plans to have school boards report back going forward on a going-forward basis, that maybe this is all just a charade and just make it another line item and take away the word initiative?
I think the word "if" is there because it would be great risk to us that we had a recommendation that was interpreted to mean that this audit office considered that the class size initiative should continue. And because we think it should continue, therefore, these are the things that we recommend that you do. The "if" is placed there to make sure that the recommendation would only be, if you will, worked on if there is that higher order decision or policy decision that, yes, we will continue to have a class size initiative. Does that answer your question?
Your next question is from Rick Bell, Calgary Sun. Rick, your line is open.
Question to the Auditor General. On page 98, regarding the Climate Leadership Plan, in your key findings, you talk about Climate Change Office not maintaining an overall implementation plan for the Climate Leadership Plan. They monitor the progress of programs, but the processes are not sufficiently rigorous or efficient. The progress report, clear and complete information on the cost of the Climate Leadership Plan is missing. That doesn't sound that good to me. Could you explain, is that an indictment of what's going on, or how important are those key findings that you've made?
Those are all important matters. They're the outputs of our audit. This is an endeavor that has just been launched, so we believe we add value when we can suggest how things can be made better. But I think the point that we're really trying to make is that for something that is relatively new, the planning, the monitoring, and reporting has got off to a good start. It has been well designed, but like anything, it can be that much better. So we have focused on where we think change would have a good result, if I can put it that way. So it's not like I'm not prepared to say that these key findings are such that it means that the climate leadership plan is in jeopardy or it's not being managed. We are saying it is being managed, but here are opportunities to improve that management.
And my second question is on the following the previous questioner about the class size issue. What is your when you look at it, even auditors have gut feelings. What do you think when you see all of this money supposedly going to something and coming out to finding out what actually happened? What's your gut feeling when you see something like that so blatant?
As an Albertan, I'm hugely disappointed. I believe that Albertans, and particularly parents, should be disappointed in that they have not had a full explanation of whether or not this investment of their money, $2.7 billion over however many years it is.
13 years.
Yeah, 13 years. Without any reporting on whether or not it made a difference. I mean, there are some tables that that we have given in our report with the caution that those are, the use of averages there, to be honest, isn't particularly useful to any parent. I believe that actually we've moved into an age now where the data that the department uses to get at its averages should in fact be made available to all Albertans. There are many Albertans with the skills to take data about the class size in every school. It can be easily uploaded and made public, and Albertans can interrogate it and come to their own conclusions on whether or not this initiative is working for them. Because in the end, something works if you as a parent think it's working for you. So I believe Albertans should be disappointed in the extent to which they have been informed about the expenditure of this $2.7 billion.
Well, last question. What does this say, do you think, about the people receiving this money? I know that in our media business, if we got any money and it wasn't properly explained and accounted for, there'd be hell to pay. What do you think of what does this say that you have come to this point in these findings? After all these years and all this money, we're where we are.
Well,
I mean, what does that say about the people getting the money, who pleaded for this money because this was supposed to do something wonderful in the classrooms, and actually are continuing to plead for more of it as we speak? I mean, what does that say about people who don't provide the kind of information that you think should be sought, should be given?
Well, we haven't, I'm going to be very cautious about anything I say in answer to your question, because we haven't audited or engaged with the people who received this money. We have looked at this solely through the lens of the provider of the funds, the notion that, the provider should have made absolutely clear the expectations. If halfway through this, the form of this changed, I think there was an obligation to publicly announce this class size initiative. We no longer call it that. We provide the money to school jurisdictions as part of the base funding, and it is used in furtherance of good education. I have no evidence to talk about what the people who received it should be saying about it. I will make one point that my colleague made earlier today, that at the jurisdiction levels there is different reporting. It's not uniform, I believe. I'll ask Rob just to supplement.
So one thing I want to clarify right from the start is that there's nothing in our report that indicates that the money at a jurisdictional level wasn't spent on class sizes. It's the discretion at a jurisdictional level where that funding could be applied. So while there has been a focus by the department on that money to be spent on the K-3 grade level, a jurisdiction has the ability, if they want, after they get that money, to apply it to a different grade level. So it's that ability to spend the money on a different grade level from maybe what it was provided for, specifically, that there could be some discretion there. So I just want to make that very clear. With respect to the reporting that's done, there is reporting at a school board level, and we didn't analyze all the school boards and what sort of reporting that they have, but I have seen other jurisdictions or school jurisdictions that provide information similar to what the department does, looking at their particular jurisdiction and the average class sizes for their schools at those grade levels. Now, again, because that's aggregated information, that might not be the most helpful information to a parent. But that information on an average level is in line with the recommendations that were made by the Alberta Commission on Learning way back in 2003. So jurisdictions are being consistent in reporting in that manner. What we've highlighted in our report is that with some good analysis that adds a little bit more flavor about what that means, and potentially with the underlying data, what they've learned and what they're going to change, and maybe where there are specific areas that they need to focus on within a grade group and how to improve. That analysis, we don't see any reporting of that, and that would be, I think, very helpful information to Albertans to understand this initiative and what's being done with that funding now and going forward.
Okay, so we're at the 1 hour mark. So if there's any questions, any final questions, I think we'll just kind of wrap up, and just note with that that lots of information is available on the Office of the Auditor General's website at oag.ab.ca, and there's some additional information and some video summaries as well as executive summaries of the reports that have been presented today. Any final questions? Thank you very much for coming and watching the video conference as well. Good afternoon.